scientist, and I feel a bit like I've wandered into the wrong circus here. Can I just ask, how many of you are engineers or related to the engineering dimension of wind energy? Can I just have a show of hands? Right, definitely the majority, right? So now, what we're going to say, our little team this morning, or this afternoon, is the engineering stuff is the easy stuff, right? Your turbines don't blow up very often, they don't burn up very often, we know there's a risk. But the real risks that you're going to experience in South Africa anyway, but also other countries in the social domain. Okay, now the title has changed a bit, but sort of figuring out which way the wind blows, you can use any kind of metaphor for this, and what the impacts are likely to be in South Africa. This is the famous map from the Energy blog. Apparently the owner of the Energy blog is here. Thank you so much. Okay, for people like us who don't know too much about wind energy or solar, it is an unbelievable resource. I'm deeply grateful. As you can see from there, in rural South Africa, this number of solar and wind projects, and as we'll get to in a minute, is rural South Africa is where social and governance systems are the weakest. Now, in other countries, when you look at the literature, the social literature on wind energy, what you find is a lot of contestation, and very often around the NIMBY phenomenon, where people in principle like wind and alternative energies, but oh gosh, not in my backyard, please. So there's a lot of NIMBY stuff going on. And for very good reason, because it's got impacts on the landscape in terms of aesthetics and therefore tourism. There's to change the whole feel of a landscape. Impacts on biodiversity, impacts on tourism, as I said, impacts on the sense of place. So these for human beings, real functional human beings who've got to look at these things every day, or go to a lovely rural area and they have to look at turbines, they can kind of get mixed feelings about it, and hence the NIMBY phenomenon. I love this picture. Okay, it's obviously quite special, looking at these amazing turbines, but in Vermont. But if you went to Vermont in order to appreciate the pristine landscape, and suddenly you see that on the top of the hill, you're going to say, oh my gosh, no, that's a problem. So depending who you are, looking at that picture, it's either wonderful or it's a problem. So the kind of arguments against different types of energy, nuclear, people are very nervous about that now, especially after Japan. Oil, we know, is bad news. Coal is seriously bad news. And then we get to wind, which is the NIMBY phenomenon. And it's actually a lot more serious and multidimensional than what people give it credit for. Now in South Africa, there's been this incredible renewable energy program. I think what is so amazing about it is generally how uncorrupt it is. And the reason I think is because it happened so fast. That when the usual corruption-related elements in South Africa woke up, the program had already taken its course. And so we actually have one of the really best administered projects in the country related to renewable energy. So generally in South Africa there is an acceptance of wind energy projects, partly because compared to the ruckus that went around shale gas mining, uranium mining, and even the square kilometre array telescope, wind energy and solar looks great, uncomplicated. So the question still remains, are we prepared for the impacts? Are we going a little bit too smoothly that we think it's all going to be smooth sailing? Just a quick cautionary note from a sociologist that whatever any person tells you about social impacts is probably going to be very different wherever you go. Very difficult to generalize. And the theme that I tend to use to analyze wind and solar energy and other projects is the concept of boom towns. Because typically what happens is a very big, impressive, new, state-of-the-art innovation that comes to a rural area. So what you get in different communities, there are very different responses. There is no one size fits all. One community might love it, another one might hate it, another one might grow and develop, another one might have enormous problems. And that depends on the kinds of investment, the original conditions, socioeconomic structures you've got, natural features, and of course the local leadership. In the shale gas mining sector, leadership in a lobby group, I would say within about 4 months, had galvanized internationally. So if you've got supportive leaders in a community or hostile leaders in the community can make a very big difference to what your experience is going to be. So in my paper, which is on the CD, on the flash drive, I explore 4 causal pathways linked to boom towns. These are these sudden, large investments, very sophisticated investments that land up in rural towns. And these pathways are local economic development, migration patterns, altered social relations, and then the politics of planning. And on each of these one could write a lot and do a lot of research. We tend to find, just in terms of talking about boom towns, that after a boom, when there's a sudden investment, and it creates a great, we'll explore the details of what it does, after the boom is as important as during the boom, because booms either tend to either keep booming, or to plateau, or a town might decline slowly, or it might decline catastrophically, or it might simply change its nature, that what was a rural hamlet becomes a sort of semi-industrialized area. And communities may adapt and grow and develop, or they may descend into conflict and dysfunction. And South Africa has got a lot of cases of both those kinds of scenarios. So we've got to look at what happens when a project moves in the boom, sudden investment, as well as after the boom. Just a few points about the South African scenario. Various projects like mining, renewable energy, and the SK telescope are driven by national government. Okay? They are national government departments without provincial representation. So they tend to move into rural areas driven by national imperatives. Typically, these are investments on agricultural land, so it creates an interesting relationship with your local farmers. Typically also, these are sectors which are unfamiliar to the local people. They don't know what's going to hit them, good or bad. Also, municipalities are typically out of their depth. And in fact, they're often actively avoided by our alternative energy companies. And South African municipalities have a bad name as being dysfunctional, corrupt, confused, whatever. Actually, they're not all, some of them are pretty good. But very often, companies just prefer not to deal with municipalities in South Africa. So what happens in your local area is a rapid rate of change that the locals are simply not accustomed to. I live in a small town and things happen slowly. Take years to make one little change. In these towns, changes come in a matter of weeks. Typically, our municipal integrated development planning systems are not up to scratch, and our spatial development frameworks are pretty nominal, not very informative. Typically also, there's an unequal distribution of information between companies and municipalities. Companies understand the industry, municipalities understand nothing. They don't even know what questions to ask. So if you're not going to tell them about what you plan to do, you are locking them into, in perpetuity almost, a cycle of ignorance and disempowerment. There's also no benefits for municipal revenue for a long time to come, because of the way municipal revenue is structured in South Africa. They don't benefit from income tax, only rates-based taxation and service charges. So you might have a wonderful project up on the hill, generating energy, and all those profits and taxation goes to national government. Now, provincial governments who are supposed to assist municipalities very often don't themselves understand the issues, and therefore are not actively guiding the municipalities. So what you're finding, and I just want to draw your attention to the one document, is it this one? This document. I looked through it, not very carefully, but fairly today. I found not one single occasion where the word municipality was mentioned. And you're actually operating within their jurisdiction. Let's just look at quickly at our causal pathways. Firstly, local economic multipliers. What does it do to the local economy? Well, there are direct impacts, often great, direct spend, jobs, typically in the construction sector. Indirect impacts, people go and spend their money, their wages, and induced impacts where simply by being there in this new environment, you induce new kinds of economic services. For example, there might be a bank that opens up. And this we can measure both in quantitative terms, the circulation or velocity of money, and in qualitative terms, the way sectors, maybe predominantly agriculture, moves into an industrial direction. So the local multipliers often are very positive and very important. There are various other intermediate variables that affect how the multipliers work. For example, how many local people get the jobs, or do you ship in all your people from outside? And then, of course, how do they spend it? Do they all buy holiday homes far away, or do they spend it locally? The hospitality sector, where the contractors stay. And then, quite controversially, the impact on tourism. It's a big question in the international literature of what wind energy projects do to tourism. And there's a question of, can we use these turbines for some kind of funky green tourism, where people go and look at a turbine and they, have a special experience? Maybe. Not if you came to the Karoo to do a spot of hunting in a pristine environment. So that's the first pathway. The second pathway is immigration. People move. Or the first thing you find in a boom town is job seekers pitch up. They might never get a job, but they're there now. So that might precisely be the problem, is that you stimulate migration without actually giving people jobs. Often companies bring in their own specialized teams. These are typically young men without families, so you can imagine the social implications. There's already in many Karoo towns a phenomenon of what they call sun babies. No? These are babies that came from, yes, teenage pregnancies with contractors. And they're all strangely seem to have Spanish surnames up in the portfolio. But can you imagine the social consequences of this, And once you've got migration, you create a migrant path. So once you've got some new locals there, their family members start moving in as well, creating pressure on housing. And these poor municipalities who've got barely 2 beans to rub together, hardly any revenue, and they've got to figure out how to house these people. So migration is great for local multipliers. It can be, but can be very dislocating for local communities. Just in terms of tourism, the changing sense of place. This picture was taken in Darling. Now, I mean, windmills, of course, initially were 100 years ago alien to the landscape, but they've become now part of the landscape. But behind it, we find these turbines. So suddenly, things don't quite add up like they used to. Okay, the third pathway is altered social relations and institutions, and this is based on what's internationally known as the social disruption thesis, that sudden investments create inevitable social and psychological dislocation, a rapid influx of strangers, and it is very discombobulating for local people. I know in my town as well, there were road makers, road builders, and oh my word, and when they leave behind the problem. Inflationary pressures, young people may get jobs, or they might not. But there's lots more money running around, so there's more crime and often drug abuse. Marginalization of local people who don't have the skills to get a job, crime, sexual exploitation, and so forth, undermining a sense of community, who gets what, when, and how, who gets a job, who doesn't get a job. And you can imagine if foreigners get jobs, what that does for xenophobia. Declining local quality of life, uncertainty, stress, and challenges for the public service, like the police, who've got to go and deal with crises in the middle of the night. So the general perspective in a certain part of the literature is that things get worse. But one can always ask, is it always that bad? And they've got this lovely picture with a rainbow behind these turbines. There might be a decline in crime because of new jobs, depending on who gets the job, depending on how many jobs, depending on how long those jobs last. There might be increased skills and employability, new cycles of job creation in other sectors, and of course other people will talk a lot about corporate social responsibility. And this is that South Africa's REIPP requires that a major share of its revenue gets spent locally with interesting consequences. I don't want to go into detail about this CSR spend, but one can very much ask the question, is this too much of a good thing? And there's various factors which Ola and Sue and Rick will go into about the problems that South Africa's the policies causing because of the way that companies have to spend their money locally. Things like it must be spent within a 50-kilometre radius. Some communities get a lot of money, others get nothing. Some beneficiaries get selected, others don't. How these projects are managed, how the impacts are measured, different approaches by different companies, all doing things differently. And critically, are the municipalities aware of what's going on? Often not. And the fourth question is the politics of planning affecting remote communities. In all sectors, there's a complex interaction between national, provincial, municipal government and the private sector. It plays out in every single sector, tourism, health, whatever. What's different about renewable energy is those systems are established. There are various municipal functions in our constitution, entrenched in the constitution, which are impacted on by wind projects. Building regulations, firefighting, local tourism, municipal airports, municipal planning, municipal public works, municipal roads, noise pollution, traffic management, for example. So you can imagine that these projects do hedge on a lot of municipal functions. So what is happening is a whole range of emerging conundrums. Like, who really takes the decisions about these projects? Is it happening in Pretoria, I assume? It seems to be the case, certainly not in the provincial capitals. Takes place far away. How decentralized is decision making? Do municipalities ever get a look in as to what is going to land up in their jurisdiction? How do the levels of government interact and support one another? Are the municipalities able to give permits without fully understanding what they're doing? And then internationally, from the literature, you see that there's a big disagreement about the desirable level of decentralization. To what extent should municipalities play a role or not? So the jury is still out on who should actually be making decisions or at least participating. But these are, in South Africa, municipal government is entrenched in the constitution. It draws its power directly from the constitution. It's, by the way, a sphere of government, not a tier of government, with very important consequences. Then I just want to mention this act, the Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Act of 2013, which says that municipalities must participate in national and provincial development programs. You can't just bypass them, those days are over. They must compile integrated development plans and spatial development frameworks. They do that already, but very often of rather dubious quality. They must have a coherent approach to spatial development. You can't just plonk a wind project any old place. But look at the rest of the municipal spatial plan. These planning documents must involve public engagement. Not may, must. They must protect high potential agricultural land. And municipalities must have approved land use schemes with the force of law, which will bind all organs of state, including the Department of Energy. And so municipalities, in terms of this legislation, are kingpins. So, what are the future of large and rapid and novel projects in remote areas? At the moment, we've got these helicoptered projects. They get helicoptered in and they get plonked down in a neighborhood. They bypass provincial and municipal government. As I said just now, there's no mention of municipalities in the Department of Energy's State of Renewable Energy in South Africa. That is shocking. These departments work directly with communities, and there's very little monitoring and evaluation that takes place. And yet municipalities should become a key element in the intergovernmental system according to that legislation I spoke about. So just finally, sitting here and listening to these discussions, some themes just to think about. The issue of rural industrialization, somebody actually mentioned that too, is a very interesting one. It's a mix of blessings and problems. It creates jobs, it creates innovation, brings new dynamism into communities. But what does it do for our pristine places? And the Karoo, for example, is seriously building a brand around its destination of peace, silence, and solitude. Like, you know, wind turbines on the hillside. Who's thinking about this? Who should be thinking about this? Presumably your municipality. The wind resources, I looked at these maps of where the winds blow. They blow along the escarpment. You know? That's where the wind blows. In the Karoo. And these escarpment hillsides are beautiful, with important wildlife there. And view sheds, as they say in tourism planning. These are places where a tourist can look across and see a view. Are we thinking about the siting of these projects? And finally, municipalities at the moment sell electricity. They buy from Eskom and they sell to the consumer. How on earth are they going to buy into the consumers as prosumers concept? What kind of assistance and guidance are people like you going to have to give municipalities to get their head around that kind of concept? And these are municipalities that very often can't even get their basic roles right, let alone such a new advance as that. Thank you, that's all I have at the moment.